Welcome back, Monster Campers, and hey, make sure you like and subscribe, ring that bell, donate to our Patreon, join the conversation with hashtag MonsterCamp, swipe up on Instagram, and visit our sponsor and save 20% off a king-size mattress with offer code MonsterCamp. Well, the fall season is headed our way faster than a Yeti on an e-scooter, and that means a bunch of y'all are going to want to be making s'mores. So today, we're going to teach you how to roast the perfect marshmallow. Now first, instead of a metal skewer or something fancy pants like that, I definitely recommend just using any dirty old stick you see on the ground. I find that bacteria colonies and tongue splinters really enhance the tasting experience, you know? Okay, so next you gotta get the mallow close to an open flame, but don't go touching it now. Just ease her in there real slow and nice like it. Oh, dagnabbit. Nah, it's okay, no big deal, just a little rogue flame there. Happens to the best of us. Alright, let's just get ourselves resituated here with another mallow in the chamber and alright, the rodeo's back in town. Now, the important thing to remember here oh, cheese and biscuits. So just inch her on in there real slow, real delicate, and well, I'll be a gopher in an outhouse, that just defies the laws of physics. Whoa, now she's a hot one there. Oh, good gravy, I'm in a pickle now. Real pickle. Sweet tea and peach cobbler, she's a hot one. Youch! Ah! Oh man, Jiminy Christmas. Not bad. Well, folks, I gotta say that did not go as I was intending, but we had some fun along the way. Got some quality time with Mother Nature, got a few second-degree burns, and ate a few carbonized sugar pillows. So overall, I chalk this one up as a success. Y'all come back now. We'll see you next time on Monster Camp. Yeah, save me, Blake Shelton, save me. Hey everyone, this is Dave from the Adobe Character Animator team, and today what we're gonna do is walk through a brand new puppet, Sear the Monster, the camping monster who you just saw in that animated short that I put together. He's a free downloadable puppet and scene. So the puppet and all his triggers, as well as the campfire in the background, all of those are available for you to do whatever you want with completely free. So you can download them in the video description below. What this video is going to dig into is how to make a character like this. So Sear is a relatively complicated character. He's got different mouth sets. So he's got a happy and sad mouth set. He's got fur that wiggles around. He's got a bunch of different poses, replay poses that we put together to give him a bunch of different expressions, as well as this particular one, which is about a 10-second one where he puts a marshmallow, it gets fire on it, he looks surprised, he blows it out, he looks around, and he eats it. And that's all with the click of one button to make that entire 10-second animation happen. Little things, there's a glow here that happens when he's near the campfire, different things to move into manual mode to actually have control over dragging his arms around, and a few other fun things as well. So this is definitely a more advanced character animator tutorial, creating a more complicated puppet. If this is your first time, I would suggest looking at some other stuff first and kind of learning the basics of how to put a character together before jumping into this. All right, so let's start with the arms. If you're not seeing your controls panel, remember in record mode, you can always just select your puppet and then go to controls, and you will see these controls happen here. Now by default, I can't drag the arms because they're stuck in triggered poses right now, triggered replay poses, and we're gonna get to that in a little bit. But for now, all you need to know is to drag the arms around. If I go down here and click this one called manual, I'll just click that. Now that's giving me full control over being able to drag the arms manually, like you see in most puppets out there. All right, so the one thing about Sear that's interesting is I knew that I wanted that one scene where he eats a marshmallow. And for that to happen, I needed the arm and the stick and the marshmallow to be in front of his face instead of behind. So you'll notice there's something interesting with his puppet. His right hand over here, that goes behind his head, but this other hand, his left hand, actually goes in front of his head. So what's going on here? Because normally when you create a puppet, right, the standard structure we tell people is do your head group and then your body group, and the arms go in the body group. So 9 times out of 10, the puppets you see when you drag their arms, they go behind the head of the puppet. So let's jump into rig mode and figure out what's happening here. All right, so if I take a closer look here at the structure, I see I've got my main, character group here. I've got my head and my body, but then in front of on top of the head and body, I've got the left arm group. And so this just means that, The left arm is always going to show up and everything it has. It's rigged essentially the same way as an arm would be inside the body. It's just in front of the head. And so when I drag and move it around, the marshmallow, the stick, the hand, all of that stuff is going to show up in front of the face. Now, this has a clipping mask associated with it, and that's why everything has this kind of watercolor type texture to it. It has this, nice paper look to it. Basically, everything in here has this exact same setup. There is a mask, and then I've got contents inside. So if I look at my mask here, let's just undo this clipping mask by selecting it and going to Puppet, Release Clipping Mask. And now you can see I have this, nice bluish and reddish, purplish watercolor texture here, and it's set to an overlay blending mode. But if I want that mask to only show with this shape that's underneath it, what I'm going to do is make sure it's selected, Puppet, Create Clipping Mask, and now that is just going to affect the shape of this arm. Now, I could have just done one big mask and put everything underneath it, but you do run into issues where you're moving things independently and the mask, the paper texture, not moving with it. So because the arms and the head and the body kind of all move at different rates, I felt like it was better to do these individual paper masks. I think it works a little bit better. All right, so that's a nice little stylistic touch you can do, but let's look at the actual arm itself. So my actual arm group here is not independent because I do want it to move with the head and the body. All of these I kind of want to move, my head movement is basically dragging all of these around at the same time. If I made the arm independent, it's going to be left behind, and that's not what I want. So instead, I did make the mask and the contents independent. And if you look at the contents here, this is rigged just like any other arm I would normally see. So the origin has been moved to connect to where the shoulder is, and I've tagged this part as the left shoulder for arm IK. I have the elbow here, the wrist, and draggable, and add my sticks here. So all of this is set up as we've seen 100 times with arms. And again, with the arm IK behavior, that is something you have to add manually to your character. It does not come in when you import it the first time. So you just select your character, you can click over here, the plus that appears, and manually add the arm IK behavior, and that will allow the elbows just to have a little bit nicer bend to them. Now, if I go into the contents here, I see I've got a few things, a shadow, some of the different components that made up this character. And then in the hand group, there's quite a few things going on. So my hands, by default, I have a mallow position, which is the stick and all of its contents, and we'll show that in a second. The hand swap, so the thumb moving the other way, a normal, and a point. So all of these were added into a swap set down here. If I click on the trigger, it'll icon over here, it'll immediately show me where that is over here. So I see my left hand, I've got these different states. So the nice thing about triggers is you can kind of create these nested trigger systems, right? So default, swap, point, all of those are working okay, but once I hit mallow, what that actually allows me to do is get this whole other swap set of things that happen to the stick and the hand. So once I twirl open the mallow one, I see I've got, what do we have here? Smoke puff up, a flame, the black marshmallow, the regular marshmallow, just the stick by itself, these different states. And those show up down here in this mallow trigger system. So in record mode, let's take a look how that works. So I jump to manual mode, and when I press Q or this trigger right here, by default, I get the stick with the marshmallow already on it. And then I've got a bunch of options. Once that's up, I can make it burn with the fire. I can make it stop with the smoke and look like it's roasted. I can make the mallow go away. And normally that would be done with the, this munching thing. So I've got basically a system where, he would be near this, he would have the marshmallow, he would be close to eating it, and then it would go away, and the mouth would probably do this chewing animation that I have as well. So a lot of these can work together in sequence to create kind of a compelling animation. So you'll notice in the cartoon, when he goes down to, he doesn't have this in his hand, he goes down here, it appears and grabs it. So there's kind of an off-screen thing where he's grabbing the marshmallow. And that's this whole, swap set system. So he has normal hands too, right? So I can do his normal swap, his point, things like that. And this is just another system in there. So what I would say is, hand positions, a lot of times we see people doing some basic hand positions like this, but if you want your character interacting with objects and those objects doing different things, food is a great example, a drink, a sword, whatever you want them to hold, you can create another level of triggers within that thing they're holding, and that leads to some pretty interesting stuff and allows you to do more complicated stuff like this. Now, one small but important detail is that the smoke and the flame, so these are these cycle layers sequences. They've had the cycle layers behavior added to them where they, this is a looping flame animation. This is a one-time smoke poofing up animation when the marshmallow is burned. These have been set to a hinge attach style. Normally weld is what you get, but look what's going to happen if I do weld instead of hinge. Let's go back. So look what's happening. The fire is kind of welded and staying in one direction. And the problem with that is I'm going to make him, twist this and move this in a bunch of different ways. And I always want the fire to be staying up instead. Because it's welded, it's going to stay stuck to that one position. Instead, I want it kind of on a pivot. I want it to hinge upward instead. So by changing that to hinge instead of weld, now you see that it doesn't matter where I bend it or move it, the fire is always facing up. And the same is true of the smoke as well. It doesn't matter if it's down here or up top, the smoke is always going to appear up. As an attempt to kind of sell the character being next to the campfire, one thing I wanted to do is this glow trigger. So when I click on this, it's subtle, but you see the shadow is kind of moving on his arms, on his body. There's a highlight over here as well. And it just feels like it adds him into the scene a little bit more. So what you'll find as you dig through this character is that there are a lot of different parts called either shadow or glow or whatever that are basically these little 2-frame sequences of highlights. So if I double click into glow here, I see this is just a little 2-frame thing of this yellow streak that's set to 25% opacity, and then it alternates between this other streak. So I just drew this yellow, thing twice on the character. That's all I did. And then if I click this arrow to go back, you can see that I have the cycle layers behavior on it. So it's going to cycle between those two every 3 frames, move continuously when triggered, all of that stuff. And this happens a lot. So on the other side of the face, I have the shadow, and that moves back and forth. In the body, in the contents, there's, the arm has a glow and shadow, the torso has a glow and shadow. So all these different parts, and basically, if I click, a trigger icon next to any of them, I can see that, let's move this up a little bit so I can see just how complicated this trigger actually became. There's this single trigger called glow here, and that has so many different things that is triggering at once, all these different glows and shadows. So anything that I wanted to play in this sequence, I just dragged it into that trigger, and then it shows up down here. So with one click then, I can click glow and suddenly all these different elements appear. The shadows, the glows, they're all going at, every 3 frames, they are changing back and forth between these two, and it gives this nice lit effect. This is kind of a similar technique to some other things I've done with robots with blinking lights on them or other things where I want these little dynamic elements to always be moving on characters. So I find that setting up these little cycle layers triggers and you click one button and then a bunch of things start happening, it can lead to some really, really cool effects. In previous tutorials, we've shown the benefit of having sad and happy mouth sets to really add a lot of emotion to your character. So by default, I felt like this character, he's kind of more unsure or sad about things, so his default mouth set is this upturned, upside down mouth set, where, it's kind of lowered, he's kind of more unsure about things, but then there's certain parts of the cartoon, if you go back and look, where he gets happy about things, and so I do have that more upturned, happier mouth set, and immediately the character just completely changes, how you feel about him or how you think he's reacting to things. But in addition to that, I have some extra mouths over here as well, and that includes the eating mouth, this big single frame open jaw, the chewing animation when he actually eats something, and then this poof animation as well, where he's kind of when the marshmallow is on fire. So all this is another swap set. I've got my mouth swap set here, and sad is the one I want as a default. So I just took my sad mouth here, which is a bunch of, the neutral ah, all the different mouths I would normally have in a set. and I just dragged that into my sad default. So that is what would show up by default. My normal mouth, the happy mouth, I dragged into here, and I kind of renamed all these. So this was called sad mouth or glow, but whatever they were called. But if you just press return or enter or whatever on top of it, you can rename these to whatever you want. And then these are the actual names that will show up in your timeline when these things are triggered. So it's really helpful to spend the time naming these into things that you will understand. And then open, this is just the single, layer. That's all that is just this single open jaw mouth that appears. And then puff and chew are cycle layers sequences where puff is, the short 2-frame animation, and chew is just this 4-frame repeating animation. And again, with all of these, I just added the cycle layers behavior to it, and I fooled around with how much every frame is advancing, how are they moving, are they continuous, revert, forward and reverse, all of this stuff to kind of see what fit best with whatever animation I was going for. And so because they're in a swap set, only one of these is going to show up at any given time. I don't want the happy mouth set showing up as the same time as the chew or the puff. These all kind of work together in unison to only show one at a time. So here's the actual recording that I did for the character. And so for example, here's one of the parts where when he eats it and he chews, and then he goes back to being sad, his sad mouth set. And you can see in the mouths area over here, I have, open, chew, sad. It shows exactly when those things happen. And I can manipulate these by moving them around, dragging them to different positions. I can right click to change them to what I want to happen at any given time. If I wanted things to change, if I want to add an extra mouth in here, I just press Command Shift D on Mac. And that's the same thing as if you went to, selected one of these and went to Edit Split. It's just going to split it in half, and then you can add a new mouth here. So what this means is when I was recording, I didn't have to get the triggers at exactly the right moment and say, okay, he's going to be open now, and now he's going to chew, and now he's going to go back to sad. No, I just recorded once. I extended the take all the way to the end of the timeline. So I think originally it was probably something like this, and I extended it all the way out here instead. And then I just would scrub through the whole thing and say, okay, now I want him to do this or that or switch. And I would just do that split and then right click and change it to whatever I wanted at that particular time. So, when you think of performance capture recording as you're used to in Character Animator, a lot of times you think, I got to press record and I got to get the timing right. But what I find is that for triggers, it's a lot easier to just record one thing, extend it, and then just do this split and right click and change things and keep adding that way. It's much easier to get really precise timing this way. So I would definitely recommend for mouse, for triggers. You'll see everything else, the lids, for example, his eyelids opening up. I did the exact same thing. I went through it and I said, okay, I want him to squint here. Now I want it to be open. Now I want it to go to more of half, open again, half, happy, lower. It's the exact same thing where I wasn't just going through it and timing it and hitting all the buttons at the right time. I just went through the timeline, split, right click, and it works great. Now, personally, I think the replays are the most important part of Seer. These are all his various poses that he has, and you'll notice it's not just one thing happening. It's not just his arms that are moving around. It's also his mouth is going from happy to sad or making different positions, or his eyelids are changing as well as I move between them. And so this allows me to do a bunch of different poses really quickly and not have to worry about, okay, do I get the arm trigger and the eye and have to drag this or do this mouth? No, I just press one button and he immediately does these different poses. Now, this is awesome for live production for sure. If you're doing a live episode, I think this type of thing is critical to do for that sort of thing. So it's just one button to get all these different emotions. But for recorded pieces as well, it's a really helpful feature too. So if I'm setting up a character for replays, I kind of use the timeline as my scratch pad. This is where I'm recording a bunch of different poses. So I've disarmed Seer here, so we're not seeing any live data coming in. We're only seeing the timeline data. And if I scrub through this, you'll see his head is staying still. He's not doing any movements except for his arms and eyes and all the, the different triggers. And so this is a typical setup that I'll do. I will, do one little chunk here, leave a little gap, do my next one, leave a gap, and so on and so forth. Now, this really long one is very complicated because this has all the different things with him blowing out and eating the marshmallow and all of that. So they can be as short or as complicated as you want, and they can include as many different elements as you want too. So for example, most of these poses, they do not have the head and the mouth, the actual lip sync data as part of them. So as these replays are happening, as the character is posing or doing things, I can still talk, I can still move my head, I can still move my pupils around, and those will still react. I'm only doing specific things. So with a replay, you choose what parts you want to be pre-recorded and which parts you don't. All right, so let's do a test. I'm just gonna do a new pose and we're gonna add it into our swap set here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is take the default of the hips off, and that way I will have full control over being able to drag the arms into whatever pose I want. Then I'm going to press over top of these red dots over here. I'm going to press Command and click, and that's going to get rid of all of them. That's Command click on Mac, Control click on Windows. And now I'm just going to arm dragger and triggers, because for this character in this pose, really that's all I want. So let's say I want my character to do 2 points. I'm going to have him do, a double point, like, hey, what's going on? Something like that. So let's figure out how that pose would look. So I'm at a part of my timeline. I've left a gap between here and my other pieces. So I've got a, really nice clear section that I can use here. And I'm going to drag maybe this arm up like this arm over like this. And then I'm going to do my triggers, which I believe were, 7 for this point, and 8 for this point. Okay, so he's got these 2 double points happening right here. And then I'm also thinking he would probably be happy if he's doing this, hey, something like that. So I'm going to give him the happy trigger as well by pressing 1. And then his eyes would probably be happy as well. So let's do that. All right, so I feel pretty good about this pose. This is what we would call a key pose. In a lot of animation, we see characters go from one pose to the next to another. This feels like a pose that he could be, holding for a few seconds while he's feeling happy about something or pointing up to like and subscribe or something like that. So this works pretty well. I could add in other things. If I armed face, for example, and had his head tilt back a little bit, that would be part of the process too. But instead, I want still manual head movement and lip sync and eye gaze and all of that stuff. So I'm going to leave those off. I'm going to keep it minimalist with dragger and triggers. And honestly, that's what I normally do for a lot of my poses. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I like how this is looking. Instead of pressing record, a quicker way to do this when you're just setting these poses is to go up here to timeline and do record 1 or 2 frame take. I normally just do 2 to give myself a little bit more room to move things around, and it's not just, a tiny little sliver. It's still gonna be pretty tiny, but at least allows it to be a little bit bigger. So this is Command 2 on Mac or Control 2 on Windows. So I'm just gonna select that. So what did I do? Let's dig in here. I'm going to turn Sear off, disarm him, and look at what that is. So all this did is create for 2 frames, it created that pose that I've got from my character here. And so now this is something that I can manipulate and move around and blend in and out of to help create a replay. So what I'm going to do is make sure everything is selected here, and I'm just going to drag it out to be a little bit longer because I do want to give myself a little bit of a good blend ramp in and out to make things feel like they can seamlessly go from one to the other. So that's one of the nice things about poses is that when you add blending, it doesn't matter from what pose you go to the next one, they'll kind of all just ease into each other and look relatively nice, particularly if you have arm IK set up. If you don't have arm IK, you get into some weird elbows and stuff like that, and it can look a little dicey. So in this case, the draggers are the 2 elements that I want to blend. So normally the way I do things is I do a quick blend in. So I'm just going to kind of drag these 2, the blend handles, to make them come in very quickly. So it's going to be a quick transition. When this replay happens, the arms are very quickly going to move. And then normally I do more of a gradual blend out. And this just means this gives time for the next replay to come in. So if I made this really quick, the problem is that that's going to overlap with another replay coming in really quick, and there's a chance that you're going to get, arms moving out and going to different positions when you don't want them to. So just from trial and error and experience, I feel like the best replays that I've personally done are when you do a quick blend in and a longer blend out. All right, so I feel like this is looking pretty good. So let's turn this into a replay. And the way I'm going to do that is just kind of drag and marquee select all of this stuff, all of these elements. And then over top of the draggers, I'm going to right click and go to create. Actually, let's just save ourselves a few steps. I'm going to go to create replay and trigger in swap set. And so I've already created a group called poses where the hands are on the hips, the hello, all of that stuff. I want this to be a new one. So I'm going to go down to my poses swap set and do that. So that did a couple of things. First, it made a replay over here called draggers 2 and triggers 4. Well, that makes sense because I dragged 2 hands and then I have 4 triggers. The eyes, both of those are a single trigger, the mouth turning happy, and then the 2 points as well. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm probably going to rename these. So I'll press enter on those and call this double point. Or maybe I'll call this hey, because that's kind of what he's doing. Hey. Again, name it whatever makes sense to you. Stop sustained replay is what this is set to by default. That sounds good to me. I do want it to stop on this as opposed to just going out and immediately going back. Some replays you do want them to finish, but for this case, I do want it to stop and sustain, so that looks good. And then automatically over here in the triggers panel, that also created the trigger that will accompany this. Now, this name does not carry through, unfortunately, yet to the trigger, so I'm gonna have to rename this as well. So let's call this hey. And we will assign this to a new key. So let's just call this, I don't think I've used L yet, so let's try that. And I am going to latch this because I do want it to kind of hold in place. Okay, so I've created this new replay. It's part of my whole poses system that has a lot of different things going on with it. I'm gonna go back and make hips the default, just because that's the one that I always want things to start from. So let's see if this actually works. Let's click on sear. Let's turn all of my things back on. I'm just holding down Command when I click a empty dot to turn everything on or off, and that's Control on Mac on PC. Okay, and now I've got the hands on the hips, and what happens when I press L? He does his double point, and the happy and eyes and the mouth and the point are all there. And when I press it again, he's going to go back to that other position. Hey, and now I'm sad. Hey, and now I'm sad again. So this is great. This is a single pose, and now I can just move on and keep adding poses and animations to my character. So with this new addition, this character now has 9 poses. That is a wide range of emotions that I can give my character and have him moving and pointing and talking and hands on hips, whatever I want. There's probably one of these poses is going to fit the emotion of my character at any given point. And so I feel like this just makes my life a little bit easier because I can just, instead of saying, okay, at this time I need to drag the hands at this position and this trigger and this all of that stuff. No, all I have to do is click one button. He will move seamlessly from one pose to the next, and it all works well and gets that emotion that I'm looking for. So that's how you'd set something up with individual poses, but when you get to these more complicated animations, like that 10-second one of him taking the marshmallow, getting burnt, eating it, all that stuff, that's just a sequence of a lot of different things happening. So I treated this just like I would treat any other recording. I kind of focused on one element at a time. So I said, okay, I'm just going to, let's arm him here and let's just focus on the dragger. And so I just did the arm dragging and moved that in and out and close to the mouth. Then I did the other arm like this. Then I focused on the triggers. Okay, here's the stick and it moves up, and then I'm going to now trigger the different eyelids and the mouths and the marshmallow appearing and disappearing and the fire and all of that. And each of these was its own thing. And I slowly started to layer that up. So all these are twirled up right now, but you see kind of the method behind the madness. If I really start to dig this open, you'll see particularly for the arm, this area right here was the arm moving the stick up. And so I had that recording, and then I stopped, and then I made another recording where it moved closer to the mouth, and then I had it move up close to the mouth. Then I blended in it moving down, and then I blended back up into a hip position. So each of these were, this sequence was made by 5 different blended dragger recordings coming together. So I didn't get everything right the first time. I did it in 5 steps and said, I want this pose, then I want this other pose to blend in, and this other one, and so on and so forth. So these replays can be as simple or as complicated as you want. You can include as many parts, as many pieces, put many things together, manipulate these these different draggers and blends and all of that stuff until you get it exactly right, and then just select everything, package it together, and it's good to go. This sequence could be, I could do a minute long replay that has the character dancing or doing a bunch of different things or looking surprised, and have that ready with the press of a single button. It would just require a lot of upfront recording work to get that to happen. So I still feel like replays are one of those things that are one of the most powerful parts of Character Animator, but I don't see a lot of people doing them yet. So I would say if you haven't touched on replays yet, dig into it, because there is a world of just amazing stuff you can do, and just having all that power at the press of a single key is pretty awesome. All right, so I'm scrolling through this triggers list over here, and I'm saying, wait, this is getting insanely complicated. How am I going to remember to press X for this and 5 for this and L for that? Even if you have a naming convention, S for smoke and F for fire, it's hard to think about, particularly on the fly if you're doing some live or as you're doing recorded stuff. So that's where this controls panel really comes into play. I think having a well-designed, well-organized controls panel, number one, makes the character more approachable. So if I handed this puppet off to you all, as I'm doing with right now, downloading it, or having a friend as a voice actor or something like that, this system is much more approachable than this system over here. And so it's worth the time making all these little custom icons. And that's what I did, is make a lot of very specific icons and words and things that at quick glance you can kind of understand what they're doing. Now, it's kind of a secret system because these icons are actually hidden inside the character. So let's dig into the original Photoshop file and I'll show you what I mean. Inside this character's torso group, there is a group called icons. And inside icons are a bunch of very small pictures. So I'm going to drag this out and I'll show you what I mean. All of these things were hidden behind the character here. So I've got glow, manual, all these different, arm positions that I did. Basically, I just created individual layers for each of these and then hid them underneath the torso. And so that shows up in Character Animator as well. Now the controls panel does not show up in rig mode by default. You're gonna have to do that manually. So I would go to Window, Controls, and that's gonna add the panel down here at the bottom. And then I'm gonna wanna go into Layout mode, and that's the one that lets me move things around or kind of customize them and do different things. So when you first open up this panel, it's going to say generate buttons, and it's going to show you every trigger you've got, and it's going to try to look for the artwork that's associated with the trigger. So when you click on these, whatever's showing up down here under layers and replays, if there's artwork there, that's what it's going to try to show. In some cases, this is going to be fine. So, the impressed eyes, there were 2 different eyes that were impressed, that's fine. And if there's a couple of different things that are triggered, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, those will show up here in a list, and you can choose which artwork you want for those. Now, in some of these cases though, like the replays do not have any poses or any artwork associated with them. So these are just going to show as blank, boring, buttons. So to customize any of these, so like the no mallow, for example, that's a really clear one. I can drag that over top of whichever one of these I want, and that's going to customize it to be that symbol. So you can spend some time really trying to simplify things to make it very clear, okay, this is fire. This is sometimes just typing a word in is easiest and the clearest way to go. These little mouths here, I made this, little custom rectangle around them, the hand positions, all of these, just do whatever feels like the simplest, clearest form of whatever you're trying to do, and then just drag your icons in and you'll have a really nice controls panel. So believe it or not, this character actually started from the blank template character. That's the character that we recently did some tutorials about in Photoshop and Illustrator versions, and how you can slowly customize it to become whatever kind of creature you want. So I started with that structure, and then I moved things around, and modified them. So the mouth, for example, you'll notice is not the straight teeth that the blank character has, but instead I added fangs to each of the different mouth shapes. The eyes, I added in an animated blink. I took out the face background, added in this more blobby purple thing, added the fur. So it was a modification. I started with something that I knew was working, and then I slowly modified and changed things. That includes making the character more of a 3/4 view. So I kind of shifted everything over so the character felt like he was, facing one way a little bit more. And I think this is a nice technique. Toll the Cat I also designed this way, where it gives you a little more versatility. So it's not just a character straight on facing the camera, but they're kind of looking towards the side. And because of that, if I had another character on the other side of the campfire, I could make it feel like this character is talking to that other character or talking directly to the camera. So I think it gives a little more flexibility for whatever you're looking for. So I hope this was helpful. I felt like I was just rambling and kind of talking stream of consciousness of how I created this character, but hopefully there was something semi-coherent in there that you can apply to your own creations. If that's the case, I would love to see what you've made with this. Please use #CharacterAnimator on social media. That's what we search for on Twitter and Instagram and elsewhere. I'd love to see what you're making. And if you're running into any trouble, if I was speaking way too fast like I normally do, and you want a little more direct help with your creations, the best place to get that help is the official Character Animator forums. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and have fun.